reason why it went up in the early years is because the Labour Party, rather than increase taxes, actually increased borrowing in order to put onto future generations the costs of the extra public services that they were then incurring.
Gentlemen there. I'm going to hear a lot from the audience now. Come on.
Mr. Heseltine, with respect, you've been in power now for 13 years. Where are we? And where were we at the end of your last 13 years?
Can we answer that question? Because it's fundamental. I'll tell you where. We were the sick man of Europe in 1979 with the winter of discontent. That's where we were. Now let's just start listing where we are. British productivity is at an all-time high. The number of days lost to industrial relations disputes is at the lowest for 100 years. British exports are at an all-time high. British share of world trade has risen for the first time since the end of the Second World War. And we have got the highest order books in our companies we've had for 18 months, and retail sales are now rising, and in fact the economy is poised to recover. And if you want the best evidence for that, Jacques Delors says this country is a haven for inward investment because the Tories have made it such.
Gentlemen there, yes.
John Smith and the Labour Party claim that they're going to pay for their programme through a growth in the economy under a Labour government. The city doesn't believe them, foreign investment doesn't believe them. Why should he expect the British electorate to carry on believing them?
Can you be brief?
Because I think we were able to show in our budget, by introducing a fair tax system, not only could we bring justice to the majority of taxpayers in this country, but we could fund another £1 billion, which the health service very much needs, another 600 million, which our education system certainly needs, and we could do all that without borrowing for tax cuts in the way in which the Tories did. What you need is to introduce fairness into our tax system, and that means looking at all the taxpayers, not just a very small minority with whom the Conservative Party are exclusively concerned, and which leads them astray time after time after time. You know perfectly well, John. Your proposals benefit 9 million people by 2p a week. Nothing. And just the threat of a Labour government knocked £6 billion off the stock exchange yesterday. Just the threat of it.
Lady there. Yes, that lady there. Yes.
Oh, sorry. Mr. Heseltine, I have a son who's unemployed at 21, and you haven't done nothing for him in the last 13 years you've been in power. On top of it, VAT had gone up on everyday goods, while the tax for your people at the top have come down. And I'm a civil servant, and I've worked for the Department of Social Security, and you say you're improving the benefit for the old. You have not so far. £54 a week. It's not decent money for people who are paying and suffering the wealth for this country.
Do you want to answer that?
Well, yes, I would. I mean, with respect,
brief, though?
With respect, your son is 21. He hasn't actually had much adult experience under a Conservative government. The fact of the matter is, what we have to establish, what you have to establish, is whether your son has a better prospect of a helpful life and full employment under the recovery of the economy, which is now coming, or whether. Sorry,
you promised to get rid of the poll tax. You haven't.
Let me answer the question. What you have to understand is, if you have a Labour government, interest rates will go up, mortgage rates will go up, taxes will go up, and the economy will come to a juddering halt. That will not only harm your son, but many, many people who are currently employed and looking forward to the recovery which is beginning.
Lady there. Now listen, everyone wants to talk to Michael Heseltine. We've got 3 other panellists around this table.
I'd like to talk to. I'd like to mention to John Smith. He wasn't sure whether his tax ideas were disincentive or not. I actually work in a sales environment. The last 2 weeks, I've been walking around the office, and people have been calculating how much money they're actually going to lose if John Smith comes into power. Now, these aren't necessarily the 2 people and you're out of 10. They could be the people in the number 7 and 8 position who are trying to get into the top 2. It's an extreme disincentive, and people are very alarmed if he does get in.
John Smith.
No one who earns under £22,000 a year, which is actually, even if you take the South East, which Michael Heseltine thought was the only part of the country we should be concerned about, but even if you take it as the South East, it's still well above the average income in the South East. We would not pay any more tax under the proposals which I put forward, which do benefit 8 out of 10 families, and therefore if there is an incentive, it's an incentive to a larger number of people. But it is interesting that we're told that this is a tremendous increase in taxes to take off the national insurance limit to make everybody pay national insurance on the same basis. That is to say that the higher income people should pay on exactly the same basis as the people under 21,000, which I thought is only fair. And I think people earning £40,000 and above can afford to pay a bit more in tax at a 50% rate. I don't think that's unfair or extreme. And do remember that there are more people in this country than just the people at the top. There's a lot of other people as well who have interests and who have incentives and have all sorts of other things to be considered, and that's what any government that wants to govern in the interests of all the people should bear in mind.
And they're all going to pay, they're all going to pay an extra £25 a week in tax to fund your extra promises.
You've had a lot of terms. Can I just point out two reasons why we know Michael Heseltine's in very substantial trouble on this question. Firstly, he had to quote in his defence Jacques Delors. Now, when a Tory has to quote Jacques Delors, you know they're getting desperate. And secondly, of course, when he was talking about the opinion polls, he uses the word mixed. Now, mixed is a politician's word. If you don't like the results of opinion polls, you call them mixed. If you like the results, you call them superb. So the fact that he had to say that the polls were mixed on the tax question illustrates the underlying weakness of his position. Most people realise that the last 13 years has been a process of Robin Hood in reverse, redistribution from the poor to the rich. Most people realise there's going to have to be a change in another direction. Now, of course, it has to be a sensible change. I mean, I agree there should be the low 20p band at the low end of income for the first £3,000 of taxable income. And when we proposed this, incidentally, Michael, 2 weeks before the budget, the Tory party in Scotland dismissed it, said it was O-grade economics. Of course, they didn't know it was going to be in the Chancellor's speech 2 weeks later. But the basic point is, most people realise that it's time for the poorer people in this country to get a fair crack of the whip. And that's one of the reasons that your party is going to lose next Thursday. Alan B.
If you try, as John Smith is doing, to say that 8 out of 10 people are going to be better off, or as Michael Heseltine seems to be trying to say, that everybody's going to be better off in terms of taxation, you will not sort out the education system of this country. And that is why you've got to be honest with people and say, if you want a decent education system, you are going to have to pay for it, and it's no use relying on a small proportion of the population to pay for it. Those who are in work with significant earnings will be ready to make that extra 1 penny contribution.
Thank you. Gentleman over there at the back, yes. Sir.
Mr. Chairman, I know this is an old chestnut, but when you think you've got some wonderful minds on your panel, and there are a great many politicians who are also wonderful minds, why in heaven's name can they not work together to make this country something worthwhile instead of wasting theirs and our time by fighting each other?
There. Yes. In the grey.
Michael Heseltine has always spoken about the last 13 years, but he's forgotten the homeless, the NHS, education, and the stock exchange might have fallen, but in Japan it fell 4.5%. So what are you on about? I mean, it fell 4.5% in Japan. So tell me.
I've been explaining.
I have been blaming Labour all the time for things that happen.
There is a world of difference between the reductions in the stock exchange as a result of the persistent recessional pressures which Japan is going through, and the one-day immediate reaction when Labour went ahead in the polls, 6 billion off the savings of the British people. That is just as nothing to what you would see. That's what you would see if you had a Labour government but with knobs on. If you raise the question of the health service, what you might start trying to answer is why 1.5 million more patients are being treated in the health service this year than 1979. Why it is we've got 6... You don't care, do you? About the facts. All you want it is... Well, are you telling me the 69,000 extra nurses is a con? Are you telling me the 17,000 extra doctors is a con? Do you actually care about the answers at all, about anything? Or are you just sort of making propaganda because you happen to want to support the rotten case the Labour Party's got on?
Right. I hate giving any one person the last word. We'll take another question. We'll take it. That's enough. We'll have a question from Eric Spencer, who is a design engineer. Mr. Spencer.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Given the clear desire of the Scottish people for a Scottish Parliament, does the panel think the days of the Union are numbered?
Alex Salmond. Oh, yes, I do. I think the days of the days of surprise.
How numbered?
But, well, I think next Thursday, Scotland is going to take a giant step forward towards Scottish independence. I think the argument that's been joined in Scotland, in many ways, with respect, is a much bigger argument than has been the case, as far as I can see, south of the border, where it's been a very sterile, arid exchange between the Tory and the Labour parties at Westminster. In Scotland, we've been having a constitutional debate about the future of our nation. And I think that the balance of argument, certainly in the most recent indications we have in the opinion polls in Scotland tonight, is the case for independence in Europe, and the Scottish National Party is winning through that argument. We are only 7 points now behind the Labour Party in Scotland. That's a very dramatic difference from where we were at the last general election. And the reasons, of course, are not setting up a parliament for the sake of having a parliament in Edinburgh so the tourists can come and visit it. The reasons we want a parliament in Edinburgh is we want a people's parliament. We want social justice and economic progress in Scotland. And the one decisive step we can take to achieve these aims next Thursday is to vote for independence in Europe and the Scottish National Party.
Would you vote against a devolution bill? Is it independence or nothing?
Oh, it depends very much on what's the content of the devolution bill. You see, there are circumstances when the Labour Party would vote against devolution. I mean, they've said they'll vote against devolution if it involves a cut in the number of Scottish MPs at Westminster. There are circumstances when the Liberals would vote against devolution. They've said they'll vote against it, not if there's not PR for the Scottish Assembly. They say they'll vote against it if there's not proportional representation for the Westminster Parliament. Which seems about, well, you'll vote against the package, including devolution. So quite clearly, there are circumstances when we couldn't accept devolution. I mean, for example, if there was another rigged referendum, not everybody will know here, but in 1979, the government held a referendum in which the dead were allowed to vote. People who weren't able to vote were counted as if they'd voted against devolution. So we wouldn't have any 40% rule if that was included in a devolution package. So quite clearly there are circumstances where we couldn't support devolution. But once we know what's in the Labour Party's package, and I'm hoping to know before next Thursday,
well he can tell you now.
Well, maybe John will tell us tonight. Well, then we'll know if there are substantial economic powers, substantial powers of the Scottish economy, powers to stop Trident coming to the River Clyde, and powers to ensure that Scotland gets a decent deal in the European community. Now, I think the combination of these powers is independence in Europe, and somehow I suspect that John won't be able to tell us that the Labour Party have been converted to that cause.
John Smith.
Of course not, because we believe in the United Kingdom and want to preserve the United Kingdom, which I think is of great benefit to the people of Scotland, as well as to the people of other parts of the United Kingdom. But I do believe that the government of the United Kingdom is over-centralised, and I think it is time that's long overdue to have a Scottish Parliament. I actually spent some time myself as a minister in the last Labour government on this very task. The honest answer that Alex Salmond should have given to your question on devolution was he would oppose any likely bill that's likely to come forward. Of course,
let him finish.
That's Neil Kinnock's answer.
No,
let him finish.
If you just allow me to deal with your question directly, the honest answer is that he would vote against it, because we have been very clear, and it's a matter of agreement between ourselves and some other parties, including the Liberal Party, as to what that would be. And he will vote against that. Don't worry about it. You can stand by your corner and be for independence and nationalism and all the rest of it. Don't need why you worry about it.
I will tell you if it's any good.
Well, never mind. I thought you were a nationalist, and I thought you stood for independence. We'll publish a bill, and you'll vote against it, I predict you.
When will you publish it?
When we are the government, and we present it for the Queen's speech.
Why
That's
would you
what
publish it
normally
before the
happens.
election?
Well, just let me finish the question.
Can you be
please, if you wouldn't mind? We stand for having a Scottish Parliament established in Edinburgh to deal with Scottish affairs. That happens to be the preferred view of the majority of the people in Scotland, as it's been regularly tested in referendums. But we're going to have a test in this general election, and we'll see. And of course, if the people of Scotland vote, as I think they will vote in very large numbers, for the Labour Party in the election that's arising here, that will, I think, be a very important step forward, because it will help us to get a bill introduced into Parliament which will set up a Scottish Parliament in Edinburgh, which will, in my opinion, not only give better government to Scotland, but will strengthen the United Kingdom. And if you take no action on that, these are the people who imperil it. There are two people sawing away at the legs that support the Union. The Nationalist Party, whom I quite understand, want to destroy the unity which is the United Kingdom, but the stupid Conservative Party, who don't know what they're doing, trying to preserve a situation which is not possible to maintain.
Alan Beath.
Are the days of the Union numbered? I think they're not, because the consequences of having, for example, two currencies at different parities on different sides of the border will be very damaging for the economy both of Scotland and of the United Kingdom. All the links which have been established over the years.
But there could be two tax rates, even under devolution.
Well, indeed, and there are
which
within...
Which would be as damaging, or not.
There are within many
tax
countries. There are within many countries different tax rates in different parts of the country. And indeed there are within local government different rating levels, different poll tax levels between different areas. But having different currencies means that you can't price your goods across the boundaries. But why would the days of the Union be numbered? Really, the days of the Union are numbered if Scotland is given no option but independence. And that is what the Conservatives are saying to Scotland now. Either you go independent or you have what they call the status quo. But there is no status quo. Because if the Conservatives were to be returned at this general election, which would be with a very small majority, they would have hardly any seats left in Scotland at all. And they would then have to impose colonial rule in Scotland. They would have to send up English ministers to staff the Scottish office, because they have nobody left to do it. The only people who would be elected are people they wouldn't dare put in charge of the Scottish office. It's probably Michael Heseltine who will be sent up to Scotland to be Secretary of State for Scotland, the English running Scotland. I tell you, that is a recipe for long-term confusion, uncertainty, and a move towards the breakup of the Union. Right. What we want is home rule within the United Kingdom so that the people of Scotland can organise and run their own affairs while retaining the advantages of the Union.
Michael Heseltine.
Well, I think this is one of the most important issues in this election, as a matter of fact. I think that we are witnessing a potential tragedy in Scotland of historic proportions. And why I say this is because I know just how much power there is in the Scottish office. I know just how much power has been devolved. And I know that whilst at the margin you can talk about whether the balance is 100% right or 95% or 90% right, in truth it would make no effective difference to switch a little bit of power from London to Edinburgh. But what would happen is that people would say, well, it's no good, we need more. It hasn't been enough. And so I think the Scottish nationalists have the only credible alternative policy to the Conservatives, because they are saying where they want to be, and where they want to be is where all the other parties except the Conservatives will end up. Because the halfway houses, the compromises, are a delusion. They fail to tell people in Scotland how much power they've already got, how much Scottish ministers determine, how much Scottish local government determines, how much the people of Scotland determine. So we would actually then be taken down a road, salami slicing, to the point at which not quite enough had been given, and ultimately you'll have separation. Now, I think that is a tragedy of historic proportions. But I also happen to think it's a delusion. Because, you see, what Alex has got to say is, oh, well, really, it'll all be all right, because we'll stay within the community. What we've got to have is economic powers. How many economic powers does he actually think he's going to be able to get in Scotland within the single marketplace? We now have a European monetary...
How many economic powers are you going to have in the United Kingdom within the single marketplace?
No, but I'm just about to say, we have a European monetary system, we have a single market, we have the Single European Act, and you're peddling the idea to the Scottish people that you're going to be able to get some special powers in Scotland within the single market. You're not. The second thing you're not going to be able to get is the Europeans to give countenance to what you're suggesting. Just think what he's suggesting. He wants the Italians to be told that Scotland can have a special position and that Sardinia won't ask for it. He wants the Spanish to be told that the Scottish can have a special position and that the Basques won't ask for it. He's going to be telling the people of France that he wants a special position and that Corsica won't ask for it.
That point.
And none of them will accept this delusion.
But you haven't answered his point. Very briefly, what moral right would the Tory party, with only a handful of MPs, have to govern Scotland if you win the next election?
Well, let me answer that question. And I will try to answer it as sincerely as I can. I believe that in politics, I'm absolutely sure that all three of my colleagues on this table, I happen to know them all, and I believe this is true, they say what they believe, genuinely believing it. It is not first and foremost what public opinion says. It's what you as a politician believe to be right. History is littered with examples of where public opinion was wrong and changed its mind dramatically very quickly.
Well, can I tell
so
you...
it's very important that if you, as I do as a Conservative, believe that the breakup of the Union would be a historic mistake of incalculable proportions,
Michael,
I say it without compromise,
wrong,
believing that I am right. And no compromising from my colleagues here would persuade me to fail to warn the Scottish people of the dangers that lie ahead.
Well, we understand your position. We now understand Michael's position. I understand that he's going to appear in Scotland over the next few days like the cavalry coming over the hill to try and save the skins of the remaining band of Scottish Conservatives. But you see, where you're wrong is that you don't seem to realise we're moving into a new union in Europe, and it needs us to redefine our relationships within the old union of the United Kingdom. So you're saying that Scotland wants some special status. We don't want special status at all. Last September, John Major made a speech in Paris in which he was envisaging a European community of up to 30 member states by the end of this century. And what we say in Scotland, Michael, is yes, we agree with that. We're thoroughly in support of that. And we want the ancient nation of Scotland to be a full part of that process with equality of status with other nations in the European community.
John Smith.
I agree very much with what Michael Heseltine says in one respect, that we should say honestly and clearly what we believe in constitutional questions. But let me say to him that I believe very much in the unity of the United Kingdom. But if he goes about it in the way in which he's seeking to defend it, he will destroy it. Because I speak as a Scot, as a person who lives in Scotland, who cares deeply about Scotland, as well as about the United Kingdom. I believe that if we do not create a Scottish Parliament within the United Kingdom, you are, by that one stroke, going to end the Union and end the United Kingdom. There's never been a more important time to take the imaginative step of creating devolution now, and if we don't seize it now, you and your party will be responsible for bringing the Union to an end which you espouse.
John?
You're so foolish that you do not understand the forces that are at work in Scotland. They're very strong, and what is more, they are right and they're justified. There's no reason why Scots ought not to have more control over Scottish affairs within the United Kingdom. That's what the majority of us want, and what some other parties are trying to achieve. And there are two opponents, the foolish Conservatives and the Nationalists, who want to break up the UK. And I'll tell you a very interesting insight into this. The Sun spends its time attacking the Labour Party through supporting the Conservative Party in England, spends its time attacking the Labour Party by supporting the SNP in Scotland.
I tell you, John, you're being taken down a road by the Scottish Nationalists, and you won't be able to resist it.
I'll hear from our questioner, very briefly, Eric Spencer, and then I'm going to move on.
Yeah, for one, I wouldn't be sorry if the Union broke up, because I don't think Scotland's gained that much from it. They've lost an awful lot. They're losing their own identity, they're losing their own power. And Michael Heseltine, he's offering us nothing.
Well, he's the man, of course, who voted for the Scottish poll tax to impose it on the Scottish people, and then opposed it when it came into England and Wales.
I'm going to move on because there's a number of questions on this last topic, and we've got very little time, so everyone must be very brief. And Mrs. Rose Hart, who is a library assistant, will ask the question.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Why is there so little contact between electorate and their candidates? It seems to be photo opportunities only. Is this deliberate?
Michael Heseltine.
I think that you're asking a very important question, and there's something in it. And I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why it is. It is because the politicians today want to try and get the issues across to the people. Now, you may find that difficult to believe, but we've all been through this experience. We give our press conferences, the media come, they ask one or two desultory questions about the statements that we've made, and before you know where you are, you're taken down into a series of questions which have all got to do about the latest opinion polls or whether who said what on one programme or whatever, and that becomes the story of the day. And so we are, because of the pressure of the media, increasingly forced into a position where we try to make sure we say what we want to say, as opposed to, I mean, I'll give you a classic example. If John Smith or I are out on the street somewhere, there's a television camera following us everywhere we go, someone comes up and asks a question in a jokey way, that becomes the story of the day. And that is a very great constraint for politicians in trying to get over to people what the real issues of this election are. This sort of programme is excellent from that point of view, because we have gone over the issues quite genuinely.
John Smith.
Yes, I'm a bit worried about the way in which elections now are totally television-dominated. Yeah. I mean, it is a fact of life, and we're involved in it just at the moment.
Were you totally at ease in your big rally last night?
Yes, I thought it was great. We actually had 10,000 people at a meeting. I think the bigger meetings are, the better they are, actually.
And didn't they look so prosperous after all these Tory years?
Yeah. I think the fortitude of people in surviving them and still managing to look as well as our supporters were should be commended. But there we are. We are having
£500 a plate to pay for socialist luxury.
We can't have anything better than a large meeting like that. I thought it was excellent. But to be serious about it for a moment, the television thing dominates everything. Now, we have to fit in with that. After all, we're in the business of communicating our views to the electorate. Television will provide on one programme maybe 10 times the people that Gladstone addressed in the whole of the Midlothian campaign. Even one tiny programme in the morning on radio will address very large numbers of people, so you really can't expect politicians to ignore it. But there is something missing here, which is the candidates, the people who aspire to be Parliament, not meeting their electorate directly and going to small meetings in village halls and hearing questions and answering them. There is something really vital, I think, about that, and I regret the fact that that is not happening
More
as much in our situation. It doesn't matter how they do it. I do mean this, but I think a lot of candidates are trying to do this, but to be fair to them, sometimes the public don't respond. I mean, very often we do advertise meetings in village halls and go along, and the only people you get coming are either your dedicated supporters or your dedicated opponents. Right. The vast majority of the rest are at home watching programmes like this on television, I'm afraid.
Well, thank you. Everyone must be very brief now. Alan Beath, and I noticed that most of your party's photo opportunities are for Paddy Ashdown. Is that in your
I walk out of the press conference and there's one camera there. Paddy comes out next and 32 cameras suddenly appear from nowhere. And there must be some reason for that.
Is that a good or bad thing?
I quite like it that way, but at least the one-man band story. But what I was going to say...
And then Des Wilson stands in front of you and gets this picture.
If I may seek to answer the question, you get all these huge meetings, 10,000 people at the John Smith rally, an aircraft hangar full of people with John Major addressing, not an innocent member of the public in sight. Every one of them a card-carrying member of the party. But let me just say this, we're the lucky ones, we get the television opportunities, but there are hundreds of candidates of parties tramping the streets now, out now probably in the rain, and certainly in the north of the country, knocking on doors, actually trying to make direct contact with voters. Some of them won't get elected in all of these parties, some of them will, but there are a lot of people out there contacting voters.
Thank you. Alex Salmond.
Well, I don't think I've ever heard a more pathetic excuse for the conduct of this election campaign than when Michael Heseltine said it was all the fault of the media. The reason that this has been a negative and thoroughly unsatisfactory campaign from London is the fault of the Conservative and the Labour parties. They have run a negative, sterile campaign. I mean, I exclude Alan Beath to a great extent because I don't think the Liberals have in this campaign. But they have set the tone of the campaign. Not the media, the parties have set the tone of the campaign. And what's happening in Scotland is that there are public meetings. Maybe they're not turning up to your words, John, but they're turning up to mine. There are public meetings going ahead in Scotland. As people switch off the TV campaign from London, they're switching on to the campaign in the streets and in the meetings around Scotland.
Thank you. And Mrs. Hart, tell them what you think.
Well, in the 30-year history of the constituency where I come from, which is Holborn and St Pancras, Frank Dobson has been to speak to the...
I'm sorry, you really cannot mention a specific like that.
We have had no public debate in my constituency, and I tell you, we're in sadly need of it.
I have in mine. I've had 5 very well-attended public meetings in mine.
I will take one more. Gentleman there.
Does the panel believe that the increasing trend of, unfortunate increasing trend of American-style politics in Great Britain will continue?
I'm not so sure we've got time to answer that. But in a word, panel, what do you think? Is it a good thing if American-style politics comes here, Michael?
Well, I go back to the point I made. I thought it was marvellous to see all these prosperous socialists doing so well, all the razzmatazz.
John Smith?
I very much hope American politics do not come to this country. I think issues and ideas are not properly canvassed in American politics, which tend to be an examination of the private life of people who are standing for office. I can't think of anything worse than that coming to this country.
We're not electing a president, we're electing a parliament with a breadth of opinion in it, and our electioneering should reflect that fact.
Very briefly, Alex Salmond.
Well, I most certainly hope not. I hope it won't continue, but I also hope that Britain doesn't continue and Scotland gets its independence after this election campaign.
And that, unfortunately, is all we have time for tonight. And I'm sure that I don't have to remind anyone here that a week is a long time in politics. We'll be back in 3 weeks' time after Easter, on the 23rd of April, when we're in Hatfield. So until then, thank you for watching, and to you all, a very good night.
Tomorrow morning's election call gives you a chance to put a question to Kenneth Clarke, Secretary of State for Education and Science. 071 799 5000 is the number to ring after 8 in the morning, and the programme begins at 9:05 on BBC One and Radio 4.
Rush! Go! It was there when we won in '89, and this year we're going back again.
I can still remember when Portsmouth won the Cup in 1939. 53 years is a long time to wait.
I was 6 when Norwich lost the semi-finals. This year it'll be different.
I don't remember much about Sunderland bringing home the cup in '73, but this time I'll be there.
The FA Cup semi-finals. Liverpool take on Portsmouth, Norwich tackle Sunderland. Live coverage of both matches starts Sunday at 12:45, only on BBC One. The 138th University Boat Race. The 1992 Grand National. A unique sporting double. Coverage begins in Grandstand, Saturday, 12:15 on BBC One.
And now on BBC One, Ian McWhirter reports on today's activities on the hustings.